So, Father James, thank you so much for taking the time
My
to
pleasure.
inspire us. You are the writer of Divine Renovation, the book, which caused a lot of movement in the church worldwide. And you wrote a book, Unlocking Your Parish, Making Disciples, Raising Up Leaders,
Through
which
Alpha.
was through Alpha, which was very
That was
helpful
an Alpha
as
specific
well.
book. Yeah.
Yeah, so thanks already for what you've shared in that. And by that, we came to know you as a person that is very passionate about discipleship. Could you tell us something about how that developed, that passion for yourself on this topic?
I think honestly, it goes back to my own faith journey. I was raised in the church and I grew up in Scotland and but was raised in a family that never missed mass. We went to mass every single Sunday, believed in God, said our prayers before we went to bed. But outside of that, you didn't talk about Jesus in a personal way. And it wasn't until I was a teenager in Canada that I was going through a rough time in my life, bit of teenage rebellion, and I was forced to go on this retreat weekend, this religious weekend that was put on by one of the renewal movements in the church. And on that weekend, I had a very powerful experience of God's mercy that
Mm.
life changing. It was an experience of God that I just didn't know was possible. And I remember that night I knew two things. I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to go deeper with this God who had revealed himself to me. And I wanted others to experience this. I wanted others to know that this was possible. And as I look back, I see, okay, that call to go deeper, that's the call to holiness that
Mhm.
is given to every single Christian believer. Is one of the calls of to be a baptized followers of Jesus is a call to be not only to be set apart, the objective understanding of holiness, means that we're set apart. We're a holy people. We're set apart for God's purpose, but also subjective holiness,
Mm.
sanctification. So we're called to go deeper, and then also for others to know that call to go out. And so these two things, in a sense, they, they are what discipleship is all about, right? So, like discipleship, mathetes in Greek is the word for disciple, and it comes from manthano, the verb in Greek, which means to learn, right? So a disciple simply is a learner. Learning what? Learning information? No, not just information. Yes, you're going to grow. You're going to grow in information, but it's learning to be another Jesus, learning to be like Jesus, learning to be the hands and feet, to be a Jesus follower. That's what
Mm.
discipleship means. And it's the Latin word in that is the English word comes from a Latin word where we get the same root as discipline. So as you think about discipleship, is intentional and it's disciplined and it's lifelong and it's a learning. And I look back in my own life. See, before I had that experience, I used to have to go to Sunday school. I hated it. I despised it. I wasn't interested. I didn't. And if any of you are out there are teachers, you know how difficult it is to teach people who have no desire to learn. See, that's the whole thing, is that to really become capable of being a disciple, you've got to awaken that desire, which only comes through not just knowing about Jesus, but knowing him personally, because then you're hungry for more. So that was a point of divergence in my life that I can look back on and say, that made the difference.
Mm.
Encountering Jesus personally and coming into relationship with him, everything else kind of fell into place. And when I came into ministry, or even before I came into full-time ministry, I knew that a lot of people in churches were just like me before I had this conversion. We go through the motions. We believe in God. We say our prayers. We have some experience of God, but we don't have this hunger for more. We haven't become disciples. And then just finally, something that the present Pope Francis, before he was Pope, wrote in a document about almost 20 years ago for the Latin American bishops, where he first used the term missionary disciple. It's a phrase
Mm.
that Pope Francis likes. And one of the points that they made is that if you're an authentic disciple, you will immediately also be a missionary disciple. It's not like, oh, you have to become a disciple and then you have to do Bible study for 6 years and then you have to go, study theology for 4 years. And maybe then some people might be able to be missionaries. No, some of our, in our experience of Alpha, and I'm sure yours as well, some of our best missionaries are the people who met Jesus last week.
Yes.
So
sure.
Missionary disciple is, I guess, what I became after that retreat weekend.
Yeah, so that's so important that it comes from personal experience for you, and then it had a big impact in your calling and the way you live as well.
And then it was, well, how do we wake this up? When I fed my first church, it was like, it just seemed so dead. Like, I remember my first weekend, felt like I was at a zombie convention. You would be mistaken to think that no one actually wanted to be there. There was no joy. There was no, it was just kind of a parish full of potential, but unawakened, And I thought, how do I waken this up? How do I do this? How do I bring what I experienced in what we call the movements? Like in the Catholic Church, we have the parish system, but then we have, the Holy Spirit isn't really, I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to.
It's recorded.
Holy Spirit is sometimes not very welcome in our church structures. But so the Holy Spirit will find another way to work in the church and come in through the side door. And those are the movements in the church. So I saw the life over here and I thought, how do I get that here from there and make it normal? I mean, there's always a small percentage of church members who are on fire, who are disciples and all this, but it's not considered normal. And that's when a friend of mine introduced me to Alpha. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So what happened? If you could describe it like a culture of consumerism towards a culture of people are actively engaged in church life. What happened to change that dynamic?
Yeah, I think, I think consumerism is certainly one of the biggest dynamics that's taking place in many churches today of different stripes. Consumers' top values are convenience and low cost. Think about it. You go to a shopping mall, you go to the place closest, you don't have to drive as far, and you go around looking to find the cheapest price. And in many ways, that's people are looking for cheap grace, in some ways. It's the path of least resistance often, and this consumer notion of Christianity, which of course is totally contradictory to what Jesus presented to us, and the convenience. I mean, how did convenience become a value of a group following the person who said, if you want to save your life, you have to lose it. If you want to be my follower, take up your cross. So we saw, as people began to hear the gospel in a fresh way and respond, we saw lives begin to change. People actually experience God in a very powerful way, have a very powerful experience of the Holy Spirit. And I saw Alpha begin to wake up people who were churchgoers, committed churchgoers, awakening up, and also people coming from the outside and being invited in. And so I saw Alpha doing both.
How do we invest in other people to become leaders of other people in the church? How to start this movement of raising up leaders inside of the church? What are your thoughts on that?
You can do everything right and still not bear fruit. Just like a farmer who goes to the store and buys seed and goes home and tills the soil and plants the seed, and the seed doesn't grow. Because if the soil is not healthy, it won't grow. And so that's another issue around health and the growing of leaders, which is about your organizational culture, but that's a whole other thing. I just want to say one thing that we also used Alpha, and we talk about it in that book, Unlocking Your Parish. See, Alpha is not this is a key thing. It's a key. Alpha isn't just a great tool for evangelization and for making disciples. It's got a built-in leadership pipeline that people often don't understand and often will not use it properly. Many of you know this. Many of you do know this, that you have to be really, really intentional in, as you near the end of one Alpha, to look at all your guests and say, who has the potential to be on team? I mean, one of your primary things is to get people back on team, not necessarily to get them out of alpha into some kind of post-alpha Bible study or catechetical session, you want to harvest your bet. You want to identify and invite the people with leadership capacity to come back. Now, maybe some of them will also do a Bible study as well, but if it's one or the other, it's like resist the temptation to rush that process, bring them back, because multiplying alpha, growing alpha, and eventually having leaders to populate your other ministries, you got to form the leaders. And what often churches do is this: they'll run alpha once or twice. You get a bunch of new disciples who are newly evangelized. They're all excited, and some really good leaders. And you say, oh, now we need to get a small group system going, or now we need Bible studies. So let's take all these people and send them over there. And you strip alpha of its best leaders. And so when you go back to do alpha again, you have to start all over again. So that's one mistake. The other mistake, is stripping the best leaders from alpha so that you have to start over. The other mistake is not moving leaders through alpha and letting them sit there, and that stagnates it. Because if you think of a pipeline, if a pipeline gets blocked, the water can't get through. And so you invite people to be on the alpha team. You discern what role they might best have. We're going to be very careful who you put as a small group leader. The idea is that if people are in small groups, they come as a helper, but they don't. Their role primarily is praying behind the scenes and showing hospitality. And the next alpha, they might come on as a co-host of a small group. So they're being mentored by a more experienced host. And it might not be until the third alpha that the person is actually hosting a table. And some of those people might be invited to be an MC or some other role. But either way, as you move people and form leaders, you're banking people who have not only gone through alpha or have become disciples, you're banking people who have been trained in the dynamics of alpha, who have a missionary sensitivity and can be called upon in the future. And the more people who have gone through alpha, the more it begins to transform the culture of your church. But eventually, you have to fire your best leaders. If you're not firing your best alpha leaders after a couple of years, you're going to block the pipeline. And that's the other connotation. The same people who were leading it 5-6 years ago are still leading it. If that's the case in your alpha, it's been a failure. I'll just tell this one story and then I'll shut up. We're now in our third or fourth alpha here, and our building is fairly small, so we have fewer guests. We could only have 50 people in total, guests and team, whereas at St. Benedict, we would have alphas with 120, 140 people. So the team capacity is smaller, and so our invitation isn't as broad as it's been in the past. And so only certain people get invited to come through as leaders. And we had some very experienced people in the church who are disciples. They had their conversions 10, 15 years ago. They lead Bible studies. They lead that, saying, oh, can I be an alpha small group leader? And we're saying, no. And they get, upset. Well, why not? Alpha is very selective and it's exclusive. It's like, no, if I put you in a leadership role, you're taking alpha is a pipeline for growing leaders. You're blocking someone from growing as a leader. Because eventually you want to create, imagine if 60% of your church membership not only does alpha, but served on alpha team. And now you've got people who are not only awakened spiritually, but they've been equipped to host a small group, to minister to other people, to pray with other people. And so it's important to get that pipeline done properly. And then that idea of a pipeline of growing people, you begin to take that into all the ministries of your church. That's a whole other question of how to help.
That's a great question. How does that work then to get that culture of leadership development in the broader church?
Okay, so we could talk about this at length, but leadership is, best of leadership is the third key, right? Leadership is someone, I forget who it was that said, it wasn't me, but someone smarter than me said, leadership is the gift that unlocks all the other gifts. And again, it comes back to vision. What's your vision as a pastor? My own vision of parish life is I'm a gardener that has a wild garden. God has given me a garden. And when I got here, there was a little bit of growth here and a little bit, it was very barren. And I want to see this thing wild with colors and flowers and beauty and I've got to tend it to make it fruitful, but I can't get over involved in it. That's the goal. That's the end game. The goal is having a culture of accountability within the church, but also low control. I'm not going to micromanage. If you're a micromanager, this is never going to happen, because your starting point basically is, for the most part, people can't be trusted unless but I think for the most part, people can be trusted. And it's about awakening people. And so leadership, the first thing you have to do is engage people's understanding of leadership, because most people in a church that's at the beginning of this process are going to say leadership is the pastor, leadership is the pastoral council or the staff. Leadership is the people with offices. I'm not a leader. And that transformation to get people to begin to think of themselves as leaders, as a person of influence or leading a ministry, is, again, it's a huge mind shift. It takes time to begin to get that. Often in ministry, people operate as schedulers. They schedule but they don't actually lead. If you ask a ministry leader, what's your vision for your ministry? Or what's your why? Why do you do what you do? It's like, well, because the pastor asked me to do it. That's probably true, but it's like helping people drill into their why, get in touch with that passion.
Yeah.
Because God raises up in the church all of these different gifts and callings, and we need to celebrate that. And so beginning to teach about leadership. So what we do, and we recommend with all our Divine Renovation parishes, is to put on parish leadership summits. So like I was here for about a year before I started those, because again, you can't do everything at once, but gathering everyone who's a ministry leader and a second person from their ministry. So I'm in a fairly small parish now, but so we would see about 60 people, including our parish staff and our pastoral council would come. And we begin to have like maybe 3 times a year a leadership summit on a Saturday morning, which usually is a time of fellowship. It's a time of prayer. And the main focus is to affirm and build people up, to speak into leadership, and also to speak into vision and leadership, and to finish with a time of prayer. And the goal is to have these sessions to be incredibly inspiring. People leaving saying, that was an amazing morning. What I learned here is going to help me to be a better mother, father, husband, wife. This was applicable to my workplace. We're building people up. And so very slowly you begin to give people an understanding that if all the baptized, we're baptized priest, prophet, and king. That kingly ministry is about leadership. You don't have to have a title. Like, you have leadership, and you're called to develop and grow as a leader, to take ownership of your ministry, to have a vision for your ministry, to clearly articulate your why, and eventually in time to teach people even how to raise up other leaders, how to create a pipeline within your own ministry to raise up others, so that there's an easy entry point as you grow people's responsibility and authority in a ministry according to their gifts, helping people in turn to know their why, to communicate their why to other church members, so that it's not like, when you get to a healthy place, and this happened in my last church, it was incredible. If pastors, I've probably had this experience where someone comes up to you and says, I've been leading this ministry, or I've been doing this for 4 years, but I can't do it anymore, so I'm giving it back to you. Mm-hmm. Like, as if they literally sometimes hand the keys to the pastor. The pastor's like, what? It's like the person never owned their ministry. They were, in a sense, there was this perhaps subconscious sense that this is actually the pastor's job. I'm actually doing it. I'm doing the pastor a favor by taking on some of his work. But that's a question of ecclesiology. That's a question of what's your vision for the church. And I would say, no, it's not. Like, that's a false understanding. That's what, from a Catholic perspective, what the Second Vatican Council was all about. Like, we are not just called to collaboration, working together. We're called to co-responsibility. And until the baptized in our churches are convinced that they are as responsible for the mission of the church as the ordained, we're always going to have that dynamic of handing back the keys. But imagine a situation where someone comes to you and says, Father or Pastor, I can't do this ministry anymore, but I've been mentoring these 3 other leaders, and I've approached them, prayed about it. And Bob has already agreed to step into leadership, and I think he's going to be fantastic. I just wanted to let you know.
That sounds great.
That's exactly what started to happen. Now, not with all the ministries, but the healthy ones, that healthy leadership culture began to develop. And also a culture of mentorship began to take over, that every single person from the pastor up, because the pastor should be at the bottom of the org chart. It should be, I really believe that, upside down. That should be mentoring someone. That idea of replace yourself. Everyone should be looking, who can I raise up? Who can I raise up? Anyway, I'm talking too much.
Hey, it's great. Thanks.
Thanks you so much. And thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy schedule to be at this conference, and sometimes it's so hard to get away, but thank you for making that effort.